Diepio versus Arasio. Which is better? It's the ongoing debate between the two communities. Some think it was Diepio because it was the original that paved the way for IO games including Arasio, as well as a game being much smoother and consistent. These are not all the reasons, but there are just a few. Some think it's Arasio because of the diversity of tanks, modes, and the fact that it's a lot easier to gain a high score, for you high score junkies like myself. These are like the legendary battles of the ages, Fortnite versus Minecraft, PewDiePie versus T-Series, Civivio versus Soms Royale, 69 versus 420 in the battle of the meme numbers. Personally, I prefer number 8 because you can at least turn that into an infinity. But back on topic, and just so we're clear, I am not talking about either community in these games. I am talking about the games as a whole and how they fare and stand up today. So if you eliminate most of the garbage that you see in both games, community-wise, you will notice and you will see how good these games truly are. You will see how good the games are in different ways. Let's begin with Diepio, the origin, the legend that it is, with 8 modes, and only 5 of them are useful, with 48 different tanks, and a lot of different unique features to a lot of these tanks. It paved way to later ball games, where you shoot from a ball and call them a tank. The real goal is to survive as long as possible until the arenas close, and unless if it's in maze mode, where it closes once in every 5 hours, you never know when the servers will close, other than an update, which updates in this game have been almost non-existent for the past 2 years, but the developer at least still cares for the game, which is proof, and it shows that this game, even with all of its faults regarding communities and the game itself, is still very good. It's near perfect for what it is. Originally, Killing Players only gave you half of the score. Now, Killing Players gives all of their score, which over the years, people including myself, have tried to gain high scores with obscure tanks, obscure millions, which has been the premise for this game for a long time. A lot of people play for score, where it counts. Free for all and team mode and maze are the main modes for this. It is what kept the best players playing for a long time. Now you may think this is not important, but due to how Arasio is in its gameplay, it is important. It's about the bullets. Take a hybrid bullet. Any bullet that hits a hybrid bullet, it weakens it until it disappears. The bullets that are shot from every tank are incredibly consistent, regardless of the speed of the bullet. They all have different bullet strengths. All drones have different drone strengths, and the weaker the turret, the weaker the bullet, the more hits it takes for a hybrid bullet to be destroyed. As for tank balancing, well, a lot of it is balanced, but a lot of it is also unbalanced. For instance, the movement speed for every tank is exactly the same, and it is important for later, as I will tell you. Where the imbalance comes, a lot of tanks are just not as good as they possibly should be. Take Overlord, the most infamous tank, the tank where you can just kill everything, for the most part, in maze or team or free for all, and then take a tank like Mega Trapper that is incredibly hard to use, and you can barely kill with that tank. You see the problem? While they have their uses, a lot of the uses for Mega Trapper at the very least are fairly useless in a lot of scenarios, compared to Overlord that can kill virtually every single tank, and the players that use them claim it's balanced when it's clearly not. And those same players want the Overlord to kill literally everything without any difficulty. But yeah, apparently it's not an imbalanced tank. It's ironic, right? It has counters, for sure, but the drones are very powerful, and you don't even need to use any reload, and it's still very powerful. That's how strong it is. Compare it to a Mega Trapper, where your only safe bet is for players to just ram into your traps, or ram into you if you for some reason use a ramming build, some people do. Then you will understand, as good as the game is, a lot of tanks are not that balanced. overall it's a very solid game. Thousands of people still play it, despite the community, or certain parts of the community. But I'm not here for that. I am here for Orazio. You know, the game that still gets a lot of updates and has over 100 tanks, including tier 1, 2 and 3 tanks, with a lot more modes, and a lot more insanity, and a lot more balancing, and a lot more imbalancing. I'll just post a clip here of Boosted being incredibly annoying to deal with, and incredibly, at this point, overpowered and annoying, to the point that you cannot just deal with them, you have to make sure you don't die from a booster, because they are incredibly toxic in this game. You know, that's the amount of imbalancing Booster has had since Diepio. But enough of my trip to Diepio Maze Mode, let's talk about Orazio instead. At first it was some kind of Diepio ripoff back in 2017-2018, or so I thought at least, but over time it has developed into a much different game whilst being inspired by Diepio, and it runs a lot differently. First, the game is much faster paced than Diepio, so if you are not good at reacting fast, you're not going to do well here. The good thing, to make up for it, is you are able to gain score much easier. Even shapes can give you some good score. If a player suicides into a beta pentagon, you can obtain more points from the pentagon. You can't do that in Diepio, where the score gain is fixed. In here it's not. It is dependent on how high the score is. So if you kill someone with 5 million score, you're damn right that you'll obtain almost 1 million score just by killing them. And here's the proof. From 480,000 to 1.1 million easily. It's not a joke. Scores are a lot easier here. But don't think it's so easy to gain a high score. It is a lot easier to die than it is to live. Not to mention, in this one, you can instantly level up to level 45. So, naturally it's easy to just die and then return. Level to 45, die, return. Die, return, die, return, regardless of your tank. And knowing how some people are, all they play is Overlord or Booster, and they're still just as annoying here, as I have proven to you. And it's not just that. It's not just that. Bullets in this game work a lot different than they do in Diepio. The faster your bullets, the faster your drones, the more damage you can do. And this also piles along with bullet damage, bullet health, bullet speed, and penetration. Also, with 2 extra skills, shield regeneration and shield capacity, which is more used for ramming builds, as you'd expect, but they can still be used for bullets, tanks, and you have 9 extra skills, 9 extra upgrades to use on skills. As for updates, well, this tank you're seeing right now was just released a few weeks ago, so even after 2.5 years they are still updating the game. The main downside of the game though, which they are doing their best to counter, is the intense lag, server crashes, server overloads. Players can even spam a bunch of Octotanks and Cyclones to try and completely crash the server. If they really choose, and it does happen, you can get around 15 Cyclones to crash a server. That's how bad it can get, and that's how unstable some of these servers can be. Now, from a high score perspective, this is good, and I can tell you why. For one thing, if a server overloads, you can keep your score as long as you return into the game. As long as it's the correct mode, otherwise you will not obtain your high score. If you lose your score, you can actually request to get it restored. As long as it fits within the rules, scores can get restored by beta testers, which actually helps a lot of players who play for high score only, and it keeps the game being played. That is why a lot of high scores you may see in Orazio, and you've seen some of mine, that's why some of the high scores are insanely high. It's unpredictable, some of these servers. Some of these servers can last for 10 hours without crashing, some can last for 10 minutes and crash. The servers are quite unstable. Another thing with high scores, arena closes almost never come when a player has a high score, usually over around 500,000 score. So players never have to worry about arenas closing until they die. But servers like to crash, and a server is most likely going to crash before the arenas close. Now for bosses, Well, there is one boss that I absolutely hate. It's the Celestial. If you pick the worst combinations of every single tank and put them all in one giant boss, you get the Celestial. Most bosses are bearable and you can kill them either solo or in a team, but this one is the worst. If you can kill bosses, they do give quite a lot of score. They spawn with a certain amount of high score, and if players die to them you can get even more high score. Now for the tanks themselves. Many tanks have a different base movement speed. They also have a different base upgrade movement speed, which is weird. But it is true from what I've seen. Not all tanks move at the same speed when they don't fire. Tanks like Overlord have a very slow movement speed as a balance for its very fast drones. And then you have tanks like Mega Smasher or Architect that are very fast when they don't fire anything. So fast that you can even ram with the Architect. Ram Battleship is common here. That's how weak it is when it's a bullet tank. The movement of the tanks is almost instant when you move around, and ramming is a lot different. It is not like Annihilator when you can just ambush really fast into a tank. You have to consistently ram in order to gain a ram kill. That is also one reason why Booster is so powerful here. Many of the tanks from Diepio either got a buff, nerf, or completely removed. Tanks like Mega Trapper don't exist and it's completely repackaged into a different tank named Constructor. The new Skimmer is the tank you're seeing now, but named differently. With this game it is a lot harder to balance everything because you can nerf or buff a tank and then suddenly another tank is either incredibly weak or incredibly strong. So it's incredibly difficult to get the balancing right. But hey, at least it's not Woomy Horacio where there's over 1,000 plus tanks. According to what I heard. Yeah, I'm not going to touch that. I'll just leave this here. This is something I would like to stress to everyone that compares both games, as I've just done. Both games are great in different ways. It is pointless to say one is bad or one is wrong, one is right. Diepio is the original. Horacio has been inspired by Diepio, which is undeniable at this point, but it has done its best to do what Diepio hasn't done. There are a lot of experiments in Horacio. Not all of them succeed, but they end up getting removed anyway, which is a good thing, of course. Experimentation is good. They are doing their best to make the game slightly different from what Diepio is, and not being called a rip-off. And to fight over which game is better is not the way to go. If you like Horacio, that is fine. If you like Diepio more, that's also fine. There is no need to argue which game is better, because both games are better in their own way. They are both great in their own way, and that's what makes Diepio great, and that's what makes Horacio great. You can argue all you want about the communities, because there's always some bad fish in either community, but that's not what I was here to talk about. But I would be lying if I said people do not play Horacio because the Diepio community is even worse than what it was. And that's okay. We all have our reasons to play both games. I play both because they are both great, despite all of their flaws. But I will say this though, if you are not impatient enough to play Horacio due to the lag and the amount of crashing, you may want to stick to Diepio because you will face that a lot until the developers and the beta testers and everyone else that develops the game or helps develop the game finds a way to have much smoother and more consistent servers. I believe I've covered all of the major standing points. I'll have missed a few for sure, and feel free to tell why you don't play Horacio. Feel free to say why you play both games. Feel free to say which game is better, because it's all about the discussion at the end of the day. I believe neither game is better than the other. They're both great in their own ways. Now that is all I have to say on this particular topic, and until we meet again, ciao.
This is a necromancer.